We are fortunate in this country to have access to a world of information, unlimited sources of news, reported by journalists who enjoy tremendous freedoms. But it's not that way in every corner of the globe. China, North Korea, and Iran are prime examples. And though you don't usually think of oppression in Europe, it's happening there, even in 2012. We're traveling now to the far reaches of Eastern Europe and the former countries of the old Soviet bloc. You may not hear much about this part of the world today, but you do need to know what's happening in the country of Belarus.
I have a method, and you don't.
This is the story of a very courageous woman. She speaks little English, but was eager to tell us about her life in her native tongue. It's an important story in any language because Natalia Radina is desperately trying to tell the world what's going on in Belarus, to tell the world about the dictator who controls her country, and to tell her former countrymen and women the truth. Natalia Radina lived most of her life in the city of Minsk, the capital of Belarus. She escaped from there last year with the KGB hot on her heels. She's now living in exile, just across the border in Lithuania. Belarus is less than 20 miles away, but it might as well be in a different world. There's no chance Natalia will go back there anytime soon. To do so would be to risk more jail time and more beatings.
Я здесь впервые чувствую себя в безопасности по сравнению за все годы, которые я занимаюсь журналистикой. Но я не могу сказать, что я счастлива, потому что я не на родине. Мне очень хочется вернуться в родную страну, потому что я потеряла все. Я потеряла родину, я потеряла возможность постоянно общаться со своей семьей, со своими родными. Я потеряла дом, в котором жила, мои книги. То есть вся моя жизнь осталась там.
Natalia is a journalist and the editor of a website called Charter 97. It's the most popular news website in Belarus, and for the last 10 years, Natalia Radina has been reporting on the dire political situation in her home country. That is, until it almost cost her her life. This is downtown Minsk. Western journalists are rarely allowed to visit and report from here, so we sent in a team as tourists. What they found was eye-opening. It's as if the leadership didn't get the memo that the Soviet Union had collapsed 2 decades ago. Still standing tall in the center of the city, a giant statue of Lenin. The Belarusians endure brutal winters, and this one is no different. The constants here are the cold and the iron fists of a brutal regime. For the last 17 years, Belarus has been ruled by Alexander Lukashenko. He was the first freely elected leader after the country gained independence from the Soviet Union in 1991. He helped draft a new constitution that promised democracy and freedom. But it didn't take long for him to fall out of favor with his people and the West. When the Belarusian parliament tried to impeach him in 1996, he disbanded it, and political opponents have been jailed, mysteriously disappeared, or found dead. He has cozied up to Venezuela's Hugo Chavez. He openly supports Iran. And recently he sided with the Assad regime in Syria. But there's much more. He once spoke in favor of Hitler. He's been called anti-Semitic, and has said he has nothing against lesbians, but would send gay men to a collective farm. In Russia, they no longer call the secret police the KGB. But in neighboring Belarus, Lukashenko wanted to keep the name.
Поворачиваю, на каком бы перекрестке не поворачивал, 5 километров очередь автомобилей не пробиться. Все дорого, бензин дорого.
In 2006, he said anyone joining an opposition protest would be treated as a terrorist. He said, "We will wring their necks as one might a duck." Then in 2010, the people found out he wasn't kidding. On the night of December 19th, hopes were high for the presidential election. There were 9 opposition candidates to Lukashenko, and there was talk of an upset. Natalia Rodina was there.
Тогда, 19 декабря вечером на улице Минска вышло порядка от 30 до 50 тысяч человек. То есть весь центр Минска был заполнен людьми. Милиция вначале ничего не предпринимала, и у людей было такое ощущение просто эйфории и ощущение, что вот-вот в стране наконец-то произойдут перемены, и люди смогут избавиться от диктатуры.
Those hopes were quickly dashed when the returns were announced. Lukashenko, according to state-run media, had won nearly 80% of the vote. A disbelieving group of opposition candidates appeared in the square and demanded justice.
И мы заслужили эту свободу, мы за нее готовы сражаться, и мы победим!
But the crowd wanted more. Outraged citizens of Minsk began to march. Tens of thousands of them. Natalia was reporting and phoning in updates to her news website. One of the many amateur cameramen recording the events of that night caught a glimpse of her.
Я все время была в центре событий, то есть я постоянно находилась, там были кандидаты в президенты, потому что я передавала онлайн-репортаж с площади о том, что происходит. То есть работала исключительно как журналист. То есть я бесконечно ходила с телефоном и говорила, передавала своим сотрудникам на сайт, что происходит на площади.
Then the trouble began. The crowd decided to march to a nearby government office building to demand an investigation. Riot police were waiting. Natalia believes it was a setup.
Произошла провокация. Несколько неизвестных людей, как мы предполагаем, что все-таки они были из белорусских спецслужб, они стали бить в двери Дома правительства и стали призывать людей к ним присоединиться. То есть эти люди хорошо понимали психологию толпы, да, людей, которые как бы возбуждены, которые находятся на площади, которые требуют соблюдения их прав. И, естественно, несколько человек, то есть к ним присоединилось. То есть вот эта провокация, она позволила властям применить силу к демонстрантам. А это была мирная демонстрация. Люди вышли с детьми, люди вышли с целыми семьями. И против них были брошены спецназовцы, то есть сотни человек, полностью экипированных, в шлемах, со щитами, с дубинками, которые набросились на людей и стали избивать их.
Нормально. Отходите отсюда. Не бейте лежачую! Не бей лежачую! Девчонка!
When it was over, more than 700 protesters had been arrested, including all of the opposition presidential candidates. Scores had been badly beaten, including Natalia.
То есть я получала удары по голове ногами, по спине, по всему телу. Увидела, что очень много людей обращаются к врачам, потому что у них разбиты головы. И я подумала, что, в принципе, я со своей проблемой могу подождать.
Desperate to report what was going on, she finally made it back to her office. But it wasn't long before the KGB came calling.
Сотрудники спецслужб просто в масках ворвались в офис, они сразу стали ломать железные двери, не дожидаясь, пока я открою. Их было человек 8. Они просто сказали, что я арестована. Поскольку в офисе я находилась не одна, со мной работали волонтеры сайта Хартия 97, то есть они были тоже арестованы только потому, что они находились со мной рядом. Меня посадили в автобус и отвезли в КГБ.
And the KGB prison is where she spent the next 4 months. She says, seemingly forgotten. The charge? Organizing the opposition. If convicted, she faced 15 years in jail. Meanwhile, Lukashenko was confirmed the winner, and in January of 2011, with his motorcade traveling through empty streets, he arrived for his swearing-in ceremony, while Natalia waited in a frigid KGB jail cell. This card, smuggled in by her mother, which reads, "Hang on," was the only communication she received from the outside world. Natalia said it practically saved her life because the conditions inside the prison were so deplorable.
В тюрьме КГБ, то есть у меня были тяжелые условия в камере, то есть которые можно было приравнять к пыткам, потому что у меня не было спального места, я спала на полу, на деревянных досках, то есть было очень холодно, в камере не было туалета, в туалет выводили под конвоем раз в 3-4 часа, была только холодная вода из крана, то есть это были такие чудовищные такие условия достаточно.
It was only after complaints by human rights organizations, the Committee to Protect Journalists, and protests led by actors Kevin Spacey and Jude Law that Natalia was released from prison. But it wasn't exactly freedom. She was put under house arrest, required to check in with the KGB twice a day.
Таким образом, я прожила 2 месяца, и я поняла, что надо уезжать. Надо сделать все, чтобы покинуть страну, потому что я не смогу работать. Я не смогу писать правду, я не смогу говорить правду, потому что мне надоело, что мне затыкают рот по любому поводу.
So she fled, first to Russia for 4 months, where she went into hiding, and eventually to Lithuania, where she set up her website again. Now, her site, Charter 97, is accessed by more than 100,000 people inside Belarus every day. That's an especially impressive amount of traffic for a small authoritarian country with little internet access. If life was difficult when Natalia lived there, today it's even worse. The government has recently passed laws that make it a criminal offense to organize public rallies. Calls to initiate a demonstration, including appeals made through social media, are also banned. And accessing any website outside those originating in Belarus is also a crime. This includes Facebook and Twitter. Our reporting team in Minsk had to videotape clandestinely, but with the aid of the opposition underground, we were able to find several people who wanted to speak, although few of them would do so in a public place. This is Marina Adamovich. She would only speak to us away from her home, so we set up a secret meeting point. She was nervous, but finally gave us an interview in the back of our car. Her husband ran for president in 2010 and was jailed after the uprising, sentenced to 15 years in a KGB prison. She hasn't seen him in months.
Однако, после того, как Николай попал в СИЗО КГБ, и власти поняли, что на него никак нельзя воздействовать. А надо сказать, что он тогда, я уж не говорила, объявил голодовку протеста на фоне вот этих всех травм. Их было больше, чем я назвала. Вот они решили, что единственный способ на него воздействовать – это полностью его изолировать. То есть лишить его всяких контактов со свободой.
Где последняя работа?
We also met Svetlana. She's a single mom who is an actress in the state-owned theater. She makes just over $100 a month acting. To make ends meet, she also works in films across the border in Russia. She lives in a 2-room apartment. Her son sleeps in the bedroom. She sleeps in the living room. Svetlana took us to the market where the selection was plentiful. But the currency here is so weak and inflation so high, there's little here she can afford. She told us it's a mystery how people manage to survive. And then we ran across Vladimir Nikolaev. In 2010, he was convinced to run for president. But on the night of the election, Nikolaev was beaten unconscious by security forces. This is what can happen to anyone who challenges Lukashenko. Nikolaev served 6 months in prison and now says he remains under constant surveillance. But he agreed to talk to us in public.
І от тут уже дякую Америці, американцям за те, що вони якраз в цьому накерунку роблять найбільше з усіх. І що вони навіть увели реальні санкції. Хай вони кропкові, не тичаться. Ну, не такого масштабу, як вони могли повпливати на вольну економічну ситуацію і обринути цей режим. Але тільки Злучені Штати Америки пішли на ці санкції найперше для того, щоб визволити полізневолених.
He says Americans secured their democratic freedoms themselves, and that Belarusians must do the same. And he believes they will. He says Belarusians have to make their people understand what freedom and democracy mean. And that's what Natalia is trying to do. Not only is she keeping her fellow citizens informed as she would in a democracy, but she is also pressuring the West to do something, anything, to help her people.
Now he's in prison. It's 5 years in prison. То есть мне ситуация в Беларуси напоминает ситуацию в Варшавском гетто, когда были попытки восстаний, но они жестоко подавлялись, и необходима была помощь извне. Извне не будут помогать, если не будет солидарности и действительно каких-то действенных мер, предпринятых в отношении белорусской диктатуры, то это может продлиться долго. А если на помощь белорусам придут и США, и Евросоюз, тогда эта диктатура может закончиться. А есть действенные меры, есть действительно вещи, которые могут сделать и США, и Евросоюз в отношении диктатуры Лукашенко.
Every day, twice a day, state television in Belarus plays a video version of the national anthem. It shows a happy and prosperous people. It is a country that Natalia Radina doesn't recognize. The real Belarus, she says, is all about keeping an evil dictator in power and 9 million citizens under his thumb. Despite all she's been through, the beating, the jail time, the harassment and intimidation, she still dreams of someday returning to a free Belarus.
My dream is to come back to my country. I want to live in Belarus, and I want to have a family. Dream to have children. I want to live in my country with my family. It's my dream.
Natalia Radina blames the European Union for foot-dragging on Belarus. The EU has imposed mild sanctions, but it's been the United States that has been the toughest against Lukashenko. Congress passed, and in January President Obama signed, travel restrictions and economic sanctions against the regime in Minsk. But Lukashenko continues to thumb his nose at the West. 2 of the presidential candidates from the 2010 election remain in jail today. I'll be back with some closing thoughts in a moment. Tonight, as we wrap up our trio of international reports, it's important that we who are fortunate enough to call the United States home not forget the many struggles of those living elsewhere. Yes, we have pressing national concerns, but this country has always been a beacon of freedom and hope to people around the globe. This past November, the Belarusian journalist Natalia Radina came to New York City to receive a Press Freedom Award from the Committee to Protect Journalists. In her acceptance speech, she pleaded for the journalist in the room to tell the tragic story of her home country.
Пожалуйста, не забывайте о Беларуси. В моей стране живут 10 миллионов человек.
Please do not forget about Belarus, she said. My country's 10 million people, are counting on you. Radina's eloquent words should be a reminder to us all. The United States cannot be the world's policeman. We cannot intercede in every internal struggle, but we can shine light where there is darkness and provide a global megaphone to those who are oppressed and whose voices are rarely heard.